Well, my name is Simon Brown. I'm the Artefact Loans Officer for Nottingham City Museums and Galleries. I'm going to speak about the Access Artefacts collection that I manage, and specifically about the Universal Roots project that we worked with as part of the collection and that we delivered in partnership with Nottingham City Homes. This was an ambitious and wide-ranging project working with communities in Nottingham, and was managed by my colleague Melissa Lewis, who couldn't come today. So I'll speak about my own particular role within the project and about the outcomes and learning that's resulted from that. So if you wish to discuss anything, then please feel free to contact me. My details are there. I'm aware of what Nick said about time, so when I get onto my third hour, please do pretend to look interested, and I'll try and speed up. So my job, I manage the Access Artefacts collection, which is a handling collection service administered by Nottingham City Museums and Galleries. This is our store in Woolerton Park. It was tidied up for an open evening there. It's normally a bit more reassuringly chaotic than that. So, as I say, we're part of Nottingham City Museums and Galleries, and I will shorten that to NCMG as I speak about it. And it's a collection of around 11,000 unaccessioned objects, which is held in an off-site store at Woolerton Park. So if you're familiar with Nottingham, then you'll know the privilege that it is to work in the grounds of Woolerton Park. It's a beautiful place. It's a real A to Z collection with a mix of social history, world cultures, taxidermy, geological and biological specimens. You'll see some of the natural history specimens there, along with archaeology and other objects. It's a real mix. And the collection is kept separate from our accession collections so that it can be used for handling. That's the purpose of the collection. NCMG is in a consortium with Derby Museums Trust as a major partner museum with Arts Council England, and it's part of that programme that I am employed to run the Access Artefacts collection as a service for schools and community groups within Nottingham and all around the East Midlands. We're pretty much unique in the country, I feel, to have a handling collection of this size and depth and with original objects. Schools usually speak to me about being able to use handling collections in other parts of the country, but they're usually replicas. You know, we have original objects, and we're very lucky to have that. So to give an example of what we do, from the collection we develop themed resource boxes. So these contain about 15 to 20 objects alongside a written information pack. So these have been selected from the collection, and the information pack contains activities and information specially developed for use in the classroom or with community groups. So for example, we can cover pretty much every part of the history curriculum for Key Stage 1 to 3 now in England. This is the medieval life resource box. The chainmail, the suit of chainmail is replica, and there's a tip there: children love trying on chainmail, which can be helpful in the classroom. So that's an example of one of the school's resource boxes that we have. The community resource boxes are packaged to reflect a specific theme or user group as opposed to the national curriculum. So for example, the archaeology of the city of Nottingham, or being developed for adults with mental health issues. So the examples that I'm showing here are on the left, a resource box called What's Under Your Feet, which is about the archaeology of the city. Some of you will recognise the Players objects there from the Players factory in Nottingham. The resource on the right is called World Stories, which is about the production of objects around the world. So as I say, these are all original objects which are loaned out to specific community groups. We also have a range of reminiscence boxes which are used in care homes. Most museums have these now. And they're developed for people living with dementia mainly. As many of you will know, it's a real developing area of museum work. It feels like every other week there's a new report about the use of museums and museum objects to help treat dementia, and there are actual clinical results that show this to be effective. It's an amazing thing to witness. The objects are painstakingly and backbreakingly packed in plasterzote. It's my favourite part of the job. We put them in metal flight cases so that they're safe for loan, so people feel that they're able to use them in the classroom or in their own group. That's probably our biggest barrier, people feeling safe using museum objects in their setting. But we do have remarkably few breakages or losses. We've been very lucky, really. Touch wood. Just in case you didn't believe me, these are real life people with real life objects, just to show evidence of that. So as well as providing this service to the public, the collection is ideally placed to be used as part of any of our community outreach projects that the wider service is involved in, or indeed to be used in events on our museum sites. We have 6 museums, and the objects are used on gallery with the public across all of them. So that's an overview of what we do at Access Artifacts. I'll speak specifically now about the Universal Roots project that we worked in. The seeds of that project were sown when African Caribbean tenants from the Black and Minority Ethnic Forum at Nottingham City Homes worked with us on a project called From the Sunshine to the Snow, and this told the stories of their migration to Nottingham in the 1960s and 70s. The resulting exhibition was a huge success at Nottingham Castle, and the display panels from that came into the Access Artifacts collection. So they are now loaned out to schools and community groups across the East Midlands as a travelling exhibition, and that's a legacy from that project. So the tenants involved with that project wanted to develop it further into a wider look at the city's more diverse communities and all their journeys into Nottingham, and this formed the basis of the Universal Roots project. So in total it involved 62 people from a total of 15 different cultural backgrounds, and all of them were tenants of Nottingham City Homes. So that was the link between Nottingham City Museums and Galleries and Nottingham City Homes. Both of us were part of Nottingham City Council. So the overall project was managed by Melissa, and I managed a specific part of that project. So the specific outcomes of the project were 2 exhibitions at Nottingham Castle and Woolerton Hall. This is the exhibition at Woolerton Hall. Are any of you familiar with the Yard Gallery and space in Woolerton Hall? Yeah, so that's the exhibition that we held there. So we had the 2 exhibitions. We also had 16 separate recorded and transcribed oral histories, which were used in the exhibitions. You can see the listening posts at the back there, and these have gone into the final resource box that I worked on. My specific part of the project was to develop a resource box as a result of the exhibitions and the oral histories as well. And those objects came from the Access Artifacts collection. So the group of volunteers was divided into sub-teams that worked on specific parts of the project with professionals, and this included elements such as marketing or exhibition design. So the entire project was driven by the volunteer group, and they were just guided by the professionals that were working with them. So for example, the exhibition team worked with our curators to choose objects to display, and they wrote new interpretation and research as well. They took the decision to base the exhibition around shoes in NCMG's Costume and Textiles collection, so you can see some of the shoes that are on display there in the art gallery. There was a photography team that worked with a professional photographer to take images that were also on display, which you can also see on the walls there. So you can probably gather all those different subgroups meant that many people learnt new skills all the time, and that was a wonderful thing to witness, really. Seeing such a diverse group of people come together to have that shared experience of learning and learning new skills. Previous to that, the only thing that had linked them was their enthusiasm for working with museums or for their own heritage. And it was a real power, a real illustration of the power of museums and what motivated me to work in the sector in the first place. So my role within the project was to work with the resource box team to develop a resource that will be available for loan to schools and community groups. And this is the finished resource. This was quite an open brief because usually we're more specific in our audience, as I've said. We usually either go for a specific year group in a school or for a specific community group or to reflect a theme. So this was a very broad thing for us. But it reflected the open nature of the wider project, I felt, and it worked. It was appropriate to the project, which was important. So the group wrote information cards for every object and planned activities that would go out to future users. So the actual practical application of how we did that, we had 6 workshops in our store, the photograph that I showed earlier, where the group discussed the kind of objects they would like to include and the stories they would like to tell. The group decided at that point, at the outset, to avoid the shoes theme, as they felt that it wouldn't provide enough variety for a handling resource. We'd have just had a box full of shoes, which wouldn't have worked, I don't think. And that was already adequately explored in the exhibitions as well. So as we discussed ideas, I was able to bring out objects from the collection that I felt may reflect these conversations. And that showed the importance for me of knowing my collection. As I mentioned, I have 11,000 objects in the collection, which is actually quite a small number for a museum collection. But to be familiar with the themes that we could reflect was important for me at that point. The group then each chose a small group of objects to research and write about, and we narrowed down the selection to the final resource. So to give an example, our discussions frequently focused on the jobs that people did when they arrived in the city in the 60s and 70s. And one volunteer told us that she worked as a nurse at the Coppice Hospital in Nottingham, which some of you may be aware of in the 1960s and 70s. And we happened to have a badge from that hospital, a nurse's badge, in the collection, so we could include that in the resource as a vehicle for telling that story. So you can probably guess that's a picture of the Coppice Hospital at the top there. It's not in use anymore, it's flats now, as all historical buildings tend to be in Nottingham. So that's just an example of one of the objects and the stories that we included. So once the group of objects had been loosely decided, we took them to a library group and 2 schools to discuss them with users as kind of a form of pilot, which I think is important for any developing process. So the community group we visited was a conversation group which was held at St Anne's Library in Nottingham. This is a fantastic service. It's a weekly drop-in group for new arrivals in the city for whom English is a second language. So it is just a forum for them to practice their spoken English. You can imagine the importance of that service now is growing all the time now for people who want to practice speaking and get confident in a new language. So our objects were a fantastic stimulus and starting point for that, and they really enjoyed it. They got quite emotional about how well the session went, because they hadn't spoken to anyone from a museum. They had quite a lot of reverence for someone who had worked at Nottingham Castle coming into their group. So they insisted on taking a photograph outside afterwards. So that was the group outside St Anne's Library. And that's a good illustration, I feel, of the project, because among that group are the people who were working on the project with us, 3 or 4 people who could come to that session, but also the rest of the conversation group, and we're all stood together, we're all mingled together. It's only when I see photographs of myself that I realise how tall I am. I'm not wearing heels there or anything. But that's a fantastic illustration of what the project did, I felt, you know, bringing people together. So as well as that, we visited 2 schools. We visited Seeley Primary School and Rufford Primary School, both within the city of Nottingham. So we ran 2 classroom sessions as a pilot. That can be terrifying for a lot of people, being confronted by a group of school children at year 3. So that was a fantastic thing for the group to do, and they really enjoyed it, and the children reacted very favourably, thankfully. It was a valuable experience, and they spoke of their admiration for teachers afterwards. So these pilots completed the development process, and any alterations that needed to be made became apparent as part of that process, and we could make them. So the resource is now available to loan for schools and community groups. In fact, it's out on loan at the moment. And we won an award for the project at the Nottingham City Homes Community Awards, so we got to go to the ceremony. So that's myself with my colleague Melissa and Jackie and Zolt from the group. So that was a fantastic thing to give recognition to people who previously hadn't worked with a museum before. They could go to an awards ceremony with us and pick up an award for their work. That was a very good thing for them to be able to do. So that's a brief overview of the project and how we did it. I realise it's quite short. I'll speak now a little bit about the learning that came about from that. I will make 3 broad points. Working in partnership, whether that is with another organisation or a group of volunteers, requires clarity on all sides. Clarity. Be clear on what you want, and make sure that your partners are clear on what they want. That's especially true for volunteers, because when people are giving up their time, you will all know if you've worked with volunteers, it's a different dynamic to working with paid staff or colleagues. So you need to be aware of that. The second point is that the most difficult part of the project for me was facilitating creativity from the group rather than driving the project myself. I think those of you who work with collections will know it's very easy to be a control freak about your own objects and about your own collections. I had to condition myself to step back and facilitate other people's ideas. So I've called that facilitating chaos because that's how it felt. Many ideas being thrown at me, and I had to process those as a way of processing their creativity, if that makes sense. I am much better at that now, having done it, and it was an incredibly valuable thing to do because we got 62 different insights into our collections. I can only provide one insight. So that was a great thing for us to be able to do, and I've continued doing that in our daily practice now. The third point I would make is that you must ensure an effective and practical legacy from your collection, from your project. Our resource box is an obvious one, and as I say, it's on loan at the moment and continues to be seen in schools and community groups across the East Midlands. And also the group themselves, they've been involved in further community projects with NCMG, and they're now an embedded part and continuing part of our volunteer programme. We have quite a large volunteer programme, and they've been able to join that, and it's ongoing. So that's a fantastic thing to be able to do. So I'll finish on a quote from one of the group. I've learned ever such a lot, and I've enriched by working with the groups and meeting the people I've met. The beautiful thing about it, just look around the room, is the mixed cultures and what is happening here. And that's a really great articulation of the power of what we can do in museums. So that's me, thank you. My contact details are there if you wish to discuss anything about what we spoke about. I am also the members rep for the Museums Association for the region, for East Midlands. So if you wish to discuss anything about working with museums in the region, then please contact me. If you wish to know any puerile complaints about Leeds United, then please follow me on Twitter. Everything's there, so thank you very much.